The morning sun filtered through dusty blinds as Michael Winters sipped his coffee, watching the clock tick toward 8 a.m. In 3 hours, he would stand before a military court where his entire career and reputation hung in the balance. The courthouse across the street seemed to mock him, its imposing façade a reminder of how quickly 15 years of service could be reduced to a single verdict: fraud or hero. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Michael's apartment was Spartan, a habit from years of deployment. A folded American flag sat in a shadow box on the wall. Beside it, a photograph of 6 men in desert camo, arms linked in brotherhood. The only decoration in an otherwise functional space. His dress blues hung pressed on the bathroom door, ribbons and insignia perfectly aligned, though he hadn't worn them in over 2 years. He moved to the bathroom, the fluorescent light harsh against his features. The mirror reflected a face that had aged beyond its 38 years, deep lines around alert hazel eyes, a jawline permanently set with determination, close-cropped hair peppered with premature gray. The reflection revealed a man who carried the weight of secrets few civilians could comprehend. The routine was mechanical: shower for exactly 5 minutes, shave with precision, brush teeth methodically. The discipline remained even as his world collapsed around him. He dressed with practiced efficiency, adjusting his tie with the same care he once showed cleaning his service weapon. The cufflinks were his father's, another Marine from another war. By 8:30, Michael was walking toward the law offices of Carter and Associates, a modest firm that had taken his case when larger practices wouldn't touch it. His footsteps echoed on empty sidewalks as early morning pedestrians avoided eye contact with the man whose face had been plastered across local news with damning headlines: former Marine, accused of falsifying service record and stolen valor. Case heads to court. The small legal office was already buzzing when he arrived. Legal assistants shuffled papers, while his attorney, Samantha Carter, a former JAG officer with tired eyes and unstoppable determination, organized documents into categorized folders. Her slim frame belied a courtroom ferocity that had given Michael his only sliver of hope. "Morning, Michael," she said without looking up, her focus laser-sharp on the papers before her. Final preparations. The prosecution submitted additional witness statements last night. Michael nodded, settling into a chair in the corner, invisible by habit. "Anything concerning?" "More character assassination. Another colleague claiming you fabricated stories about your time in Fallujah." Samantha finally looked up, her expression softening. "You know how this goes. They'll try to paint you as an attention seeker who invented heroic actions to advance your career." Michael remained silent, his hands steady as he accepted the coffee offered by a paralegal who couldn't quite meet his eyes. 2 years of accusations had taught him to recognize the look, the uncertainty, the question of whether they were helping a fraud or a hero. It was the same look he'd received at the Veterans Affairs office where he'd worked as a benefits coordinator until the allegations surfaced. At 9:15, they reviewed his testimony one final time. Michael's responses were measured, precise, each word chosen with the care of a man who understood that language could be both weapon and shield. "When they ask about the rescue operation," Samantha advised, "stick to the facts you can personally verify. Don't elaborate on classified details, even if they push." "I understand," Michael replied, the same response he'd given through months of preparation. His attorney sighed, pushing back from the table. "You know, most clients in your position show more emotion. Anger at being falsely accused. Frustration at former colleagues turning against them. You're unnervingly calm." Michael offered a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Emotion doesn't change facts, counselor." What he didn't say was that he'd learned to compartmentalize in places where emotion got men killed. that the deserts of Iraq and mountains of Afghanistan had taught him patience beyond what civilian life required. That waiting for vindication was nothing compared to waiting for extraction under enemy fire. At 10:30, they walked toward the courthouse. Together, Samantha briefing him on last-minute developments, Michael's stride purposeful despite the weight of public scrutiny. Reporters clustered at the courthouse steps, cameras trained on his approach. "Mr. Winters, do you maintain that you served in special operations despite the Marine Corps' denial of your service record? How do you respond to Colonel Davis's statement that you fabricated your combat experience? Is it true you forged commendation documents to secure your position at Veterans Affairs?" Michael moved through the barrage with practiced silence, his expression neutral as cameras captured his image for evening broadcasts. Samantha deflected with practiced statements about reserving comments for the courtroom, her hand firmly guiding him up the steps and through security. The courtroom was already half filled when they entered, curious observers, journalists, and a collection of military personnel in uniform who watched Michael with undisguised contempt. In the front row sat Colonel James Davis, the man whose investigation had sparked the case against him. Davis's eyes tracked Michael with the satisfaction of a predator who believed his prey was cornered. As they settled at the defense table, Samantha leaned close. "Remember, this is about documentation and verification. They're claiming you fabricated your entire service record beyond basic training, that you were never deployed to the locations in your file, never served in the specialized unit you claim, and that the commendations you listed were invented. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Michael nodded, his attention fixed on a point at the back of the courtroom where an unassuming door remained closed. The clock on the wall showed 10:55. "The prosecution has the personnel records showing your discharge after 4 years as a logistics specialist, not the 15 years of special operations you claimed," Samantha continued. "They have testimony from officers who say they've never heard of you operating in their theaters. We have your testimony and the classified records we've subpoenaed that haven't arrived yet." "They'll be here," Michael said quietly, his first display of absolute certainty. Samantha looked at him curiously. "The records are something else." Before he could answer, the bailiff called for all to rise as Judge Advocate General Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Richardson entered, her stern expression surveying the courtroom before she took her seat and called the proceedings to order. "United States versus Michael James Winters," she announced. "Charges of fraudulent misrepresentation of military service, falsification of government documents, and conduct unbecoming a Marine." The prosecution's opening statement was a masterclass in character assassination. Major Philip Reynolds approached the bench with confident strides, his uniform pristine, his reputation as a prosecutor well established. "Your Honor, this case is about integrity, the cornerstone of military service. The defendant, Michael Winters, served honorably as a logistics specialist from 2003 to 2007. This is not in dispute. What follows is a pattern of deception spanning 15 years. Mr. Winters claimed to have been recruited into a specialized Marine unit with deployments to classified locations. He claimed to have participated in high-risk operations that earned him commendations not reflected in his official record." Major Reynolds gestured toward Michael with thinly veiled contempt. "The defendant leveraged these fabrications to secure employment at Veterans Affairs, where he counseled genuine combat veterans while living a lie. When questions arose about discrepancies in his service record, he doubled down, claiming that his operations were classified and records sealed. The prosecution will demonstrate that no such unit existed, no such operations occurred, and Michael Winters betrayed the honor of the Corps by constructing an elaborate fantasy to gain unearned respect and position." Michael remained impassive as the prosecutor outlined the evidence against him. email correspondence showing his claims of combat experience, employment applications listing specialized training he allegedly never received, testimony from Marine Corps administrative officers, confirming his discharge after a single tour of duty. When Samantha rose for the defense's opening statement, she moved with deliberate confidence despite the weight of evidence arrayed against them. Your Honor, this case hinges on a fundamental misunderstanding of classified military operations. My client, Michael Winters, served his initial tour, as records indicate. What followed was recruitment into a specialized unit whose existence, operations, and personnel remain classified even today. The defense will demonstrate that the absence of records does not constitute fabrication, but rather reflects the necessary secrecy surrounding certain military operations. She paused, making eye contact with several uniformed observers. We have subpoenaed classified documents that will verify Mr. Winters' service. We have requested testimony from commanding officers who can confirm his participation in operations that, for national security reasons, remain officially unacknowledged. This is not a case of stolen valor, but of a Marine caught between his oath of secrecy and his right to recognition of service rendered to his country. The judge nodded, her expression revealing nothing. The prosecution may call its first witness. Colonel James Davis took the stand, his silver hair and chest full of ribbons, creating an immediate impression of authority. After establishing his credentials as a 30-year Marine veteran, currently serving as Personnel Director for the Corps, Major Reynolds led him through damning testimony. Colonel Davis, in your review of the defendant's service record, what discrepancies did you find? Davis leaned slightly forward, his voice carrying. Mr. Winters' official record shows honorable service as a logistics specialist based primarily at Camp Pendleton. He was deployed once to Iraq in a support capacity. He was discharged in 2007 as a sergeant. However, in his employment applications and personal representations, he claimed continued service until 2018, including deployments to classified locations and participation in high-risk extraction operations. And did you find any evidence supporting these claims? None whatsoever. No deployment orders, no specialized training records, no unit assignments beyond his discharge date. The units he claimed to have served with have no record of his participation. Could these records be classified? Colonel Davis's expression hardened. I have sufficient clearance to access all Marine personnel files, including those of special units. If Mr. Winters had served as he claims, I would have found evidence. Instead, I found a straightforward case of a former Marine embellishing his service record for personal gain. Throughout the testimony, Michael's expression remained neutral. His posture relaxed despite the methodical dismantling of his claimed history. When Samantha rose for cross-examination, her approach was unexpectedly gentle. Colonel Davis, are you familiar with Marine Special Operations Detachment Delta? Davis hesitated for a fraction of a second. No such unit exists in the Marine Corps structure. Are you familiar with Joint Special Operations Task Force Sierra? That designation is not recognized in any theater of operations I'm aware of. Samantha nodded, seemingly unsurprised. Colonel, have you ever been briefed on Operation Phantom Shield? This time, Davis's hesitation was more pronounced. I am not at liberty to discuss operational designations that may or may not exist. So there are operations you're not permitted to acknowledge in this setting? Objection, Major Reynolds interrupted. Counsel is leading the witness into speculation about classified matters not relevant to the defendant's claims. On the contrary, Samantha countered, the very existence of operations that cannot be acknowledged in open court demonstrates the possibility that my client's service record could legitimately contain gaps and omissions for security reasons. The judge considered momentarily. I'll allow the question, but watch your line carefully, counselor. Samantha turned back to Davis. Colonel, Is it possible for a Marine to be assigned to operations that remain classified even to personnel? At your level? Davis's jaw tightened. In extraordinary circumstances, compartmentalized information might be restricted. However, there would still be a paper trail of the service member's basic assignments and locations, even if operational details remained classified. And if the entire operation required deniability? If the existence of the personnel involved needed to remain unacknowledged? Such arrangements are theoretical and would be extremely rare. Samantha nodded. No further questions at this time, Your Honor. As the morning proceeded, the prosecution built its case methodically. A VA administrator testified that Michael had referenced combat experiences in Afghanistan during staff meetings. A former colleague described Michael's occasional mentions of classified operations that now appeared fabricated. Each testimony added to the portrait of a man who had constructed an elaborate lie about heroic service. Through it all, Michael remained composed, occasionally making notes that he passed to Samantha, his demeanor more like a consultant than a defendant. During a brief recess, Samantha confronted him in the conference room. They're making a compelling case, Michael. The jury is seeing a mountain of circumstantial evidence and testimony from respected Marines. We need those classified records now. Michael checked his watch. They'll be here. You keep saying that, but the court won't wait forever. The judge already granted one extension for the subpoenas. If those records don't materialize, we're looking at a conviction. For the first time, Michael's composed façade showed a crack, not of fear, but of absolute certainty. Samantha, do you know why I chose you as my attorney? She blinked, surprised by the question. Because I'm a former JAG officer with experience in military cases? Because you were stationed at Al Asad Air Base in 2009. Samantha went very still. That's not in my public biography. No, Michael agreed. It isn't. Before she could respond, the bailiff appeared at the door. Court will reconvene in 5 minutes. As they returned to the courtroom, Samantha studied her client with new eyes, questions forming that she hadn't thought to ask during months of preparation. The afternoon session began with the prosecution's final witness, Master Sergeant Paul Jenkins, who had served in logistics alongside Michael during his acknowledged tour of duty. Sergeant Winters was a capable Marine, Jenkins testified. Good. With inventory systems reliable. Nothing exceptional, nothing that suggested the kind of specialized skills he later claimed to possess. Did he express interest in special operations during your time together? Major Reynolds asked. Many Marines talk about it. Michael mentioned it occasionally, but he wasn't selected for any advanced training programs to my knowledge. And after his discharge in 2007, did you have any contact with him? Jenkins shook his head. None until 2018 when I encountered him at a Veterans Day ceremony. He was wearing ribbons I didn't recognize from his service, including what appeared to be a silver star. When I asked about it, he mentioned classified operations he couldn't discuss. Did you believe him? Jenkins hesitated, discomfort evident. No, sir. The Michael Winters I knew was a solid Marine, but not special operations material. His claims didn't align with the man I served with. During cross-examination, Samantha approached carefully. Master Sergeant Jenkins, when was the last time you accessed Mr. Winters' complete service record? I haven't. That's not my responsibility. So your testimony is based on your personal recollections from 15 years ago and a brief conversation at a public event? Yes, ma'am. No knowledge of any specialized training or reassignment he might have received after your professional paths diverged? Only what he claimed, which contradicted my understanding of his capabilities. Samantha nodded thoughtfully. Master Sergeant, have you ever heard of personnel being selected for specialized training based on attributes not immediately evident in their daily duties? Jenkins shifted uncomfortably. It happens. Some Marines show aptitudes during assessment that weren't visible in their regular assignments. Thank you. No further questions. As the prosecution rested its case, the courtroom hummed with the general consensus that Michael Winters had been exposed as a fraud. The judge turned to the defense. Miss Carter, you may present your case. Samantha rose. Defense calls Michael Winters to the stand. A ripple of anticipation moved through the gallery as Michael stood, straightened his tie, and moved to the witness stand with measured steps. After being sworn in, he sat with perfect posture, hands resting lightly on his knees. Mr. Winters, Samantha began, please state your military service for the record. Michael's voice was clear and unwavering. I enlisted in the United States Marine Corps in 2003. I served as a logistics specialist through 2007, at which point one was approached for recruitment into a specialized unit operating under Joint Special Operations Command. From 2007 to 2018, I participated in operations that remain classified. I received training in advanced infiltration techniques, asset extraction, and specialized combat skills not reflected in my public service record. Why would such training and operations be absent from official records? The unit operated with plausible deniability on missions where official American involvement needed to remain unacknowledged. Our service records showed discharge or transfer to conventional units while we actually deployed to sensitive locations. Major Reynolds objected immediately. Your Honor, the defendant is making unsubstantiated claims about secret units and operations without a shred of evidence. This is precisely the fabrication our case addresses. The judge looked to Samantha. Counselor, do you have documentation supporting these claims? We have subpoenaed classified records that would verify. My client's service, Your Honor. We're still awaiting their arrival. The judge's expression hardened. Miss Carter, this court has already granted one extension. Without supporting evidence, this testimony amounts to unverifiable claims. If I may, Your Honor, Michael interrupted, causing all eyes to turn toward him. The verification should be arriving momentarily. As if on cue, the courtroom doors opened. A hush fell over the gallery as 6 men in civilian attire entered and took seats in the back row. Though dressed in unremarkable business suits, their bearing was unmistakably military, the alert posture, the scanning eyes, the precise movements that spoke of extensive training. Michael's gaze met theirs briefly before returning to the judge. The clock on the wall read 2:30 p.m. Major Reynolds, noting the new arrivals, continued his cross-examination with renewed vigor. Mr. Winters, you claim to have participated in classified operations that can't be verified. Convenient, isn't it, to attribute your fabrications to secrecy requirements? There's nothing convenient about it, Major, Michael replied evenly. It's meant I couldn't correct the record when accusations surfaced. It's meant watching my reputation destroyed while maintaining operational security. You expect this court to believe that you were part of a secret Marine unit that officially doesn't exist, performing missions that can't be acknowledged, receiving commendations that aren't recorded. I expect this court to consider that absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence when dealing with classified operations. Reynolds approached the stand, his skepticism evident. Mr. Winters, if you served in these alleged operations, surely you can provide details that would substantiate your claims without compromising national security. Michael's expression remained neutral. I can tell you that on April 17, 2009, I was part of a 6-man team that extracted a high-value intelligence asset from a compound in Helmand Province. I can tell you that on November 3, 2012, I participated in an operation in Yemen that prevented a planned attack on the U.S. Embassy. I can tell you that 3 men died under my command during operations that their families believe occurred during training accidents on American soil. His voice remained steady, but something in his eyes changed, a glimpse of the weight carried by those who operated in shadows. What I cannot provide is documentation of operations designed to remain unacknowledged, carrying out objectives that required absolute deniability. Reynolds pressed harder. So we have only your word. No witnesses, no records, no verification. The courtroom door opened again. A Marine officer in full dress uniform entered, carrying a briefcase bearing official seals. He approached the bench directly, ignoring protocol. Your Honor, Major General Andrew Harrison, United States Marine Corps Special Operations Command. I have documentation responsive to the defense's subpoena. The judge studied the new arrival with surprise. Major General, this is irregular. The circumstances are irregular, Your Honor. He placed the briefcase on the bench. These documents are classified top secret, with special access required. I'm authorized to confirm limited information in open court, but full review must occur in a secure facility. The prosecution erupted in objections as the judge examined the general's credentials and authorization. After a brief sidebar, the judge addressed the court. In light of this development, court will recess until tomorrow morning. Counsel will review these documents in a secure setting. Major General Harrison will remain available to authenticate the materials. As the gallery buzzed with speculation, Michael stood calmly by the defense table. The 6 men who had entered earlier rose in unison, their eyes fixed on him with an intensity that quieted the room. Without a word, they filed out, each nodding slightly to Michael as they passed. Colonel Davis watched this silent exchange, his expression shifting from triumph to uncertainty. Something in the deliberate movements of these unnamed men had triggered recognition, the unmistakable brotherhood of those who had faced death together. As the courtroom emptied, Samantha turned to Michael, her professional composure cracking. You knew they were coming. Michael allowed himself the first genuine smile since the trial began. I served with men who don't leave their own behind. Not in combat, not in a courtroom. The next morning dawned with a changed atmosphere. Journalists clustered outside the courthouse, reporting on rumors of classified testimony and mysterious military visitors. Inside, the gallery was packed beyond capacity, observers whispering about dramatic revelations to come. When proceedings began, the judge addressed the court with unusual gravity. Based on the classified materials provided, portions of today's testimony will be closed to the public. Before clearing the courtroom, I'll allow limited statements regarding the authenticated information. Major General Harrison took the stand, his bearing commanding immediate respect. After establishing his credentials as Director of Special Operations Activities, he turned to face Michael directly. For the record, I can confirm that Michael James Winters served under my command in a specialized unit from 2007 to 2018. The nature of this unit's operations remains classified, but his service was exemplary and included actions worthy of the commendations he has received. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as years of accusations collapsed in a single statement. Colonel Davis sat rigid in his seat, his career potentially in jeopardy for pursuing charges against a Marine whose record he hadn't been cleared to access. Furthermore, the general continued, the men who entered this courtroom yesterday were members of Mr. Winters' operational team. Their appearance here was not authorized by command, but represents the brotherhood that defines our specialized units. The judge thanked the general and ordered the courtroom cleared for classified testimony. As observers filed out, the 6 men from the previous day entered again, this time in military dress uniforms adorned with combat ribbons that told stories of service in the world's most dangerous places. The last thing the public saw before the doors closed was Michael Winters standing at attention as his former unit approached. No longer a suspected fraud, but a Marine surrounded by brothers, who had marched into a courtroom to ensure he wouldn't stand alone. 3 hours later, when the doors reopened, the case against Michael Winters had been dismissed with prejudice. Colonel Davis was nowhere to be seen, and Michael stood surrounded by his unit, finally visible after years in the shadows. Outside, on the courthouse steps, reporters clamored for statements. Michael faced the cameras beside his attorney and brothers in arms, his posture reflecting the Marine he had always been. "I served my country in ways I cannot fully discuss," he said simply. "I kept my oath of secrecy even when it cost me my reputation. Today doesn't represent vindication so much as recognition that some service occurs beyond what can be acknowledged." In personnel files, as cameras flashed, capturing the image of 7 Marines standing shoulder to shoulder, Michael Winters stepped back into the light, a man who had chosen truth over comfort, duty over recognition, and integrity over personal gain. The invisible warrior was invisible no more. 3 days after the dramatic courtroom vindication, Michael Winters sat alone in his apartment, staring at a burner phone that had remained silent for too long. The morning newspaper lay open on his kitchen table, headlines announcing, "Marine cleared of fraud allegations and secret unit revealed an unprecedented court appearance." The stories painted him as a hero vindicated, but Michael knew better. Vindication wasn't the end of the story, it was the beginning of something far more dangerous. His laptop displayed an encrypted email sent hours after the trial. OPSEC. Compromised. Assets at risk. Contingency protocols activated. Michael understood the implications. His public exposure had ripple effects for operations stretching back years. Field agents whose identities remained secret. Intelligence sources who had trusted the shadows to protect them. Operations that required permanent deniability, all potentially compromised by his moment in the spotlight. The wall of his apartment now held 2 framed photographs, the team picture that had always been there, and a new addition, 7 men in dress blue standing on courthouse steps, faces unblurred for the first time in over a decade. Michael traced his finger over each face, remembering moments that would never make it into news stories or history books. Martinez, who had carried a wounded civilian child through sniper fire in Ramadi. Jackson, who spoke 5 languages and had infiltrated terrorist cells with nothing but his wits as protection. Chun, whose hands could both heal wounds and end threats with equal precision. The phone finally buzzed at 10:42 a.m. A text message with an address and time. National Mall. Lincoln Memorial. 1,300 hours. Michael deleted the message, powered down the phone, and removed its battery with practiced efficiency. Surveillance was a certainty now, whether from journalists seeking follow-up stories, military intelligence monitoring potential security breaches, or other entities with reasons to track a recently exposed special operator. He changed his routine. Deliberately, stopping at a coffee shop he'd never visited, purchasing a baseball cap and sunglasses from a street vendor, boarding a bus heading in the opposite direction from the mall before doubling back through metro stations selected for their multiple exits and camera blind spots. Counter-surveillance measures once used in hostile territories, now deployed in the city he called home. The Lincoln Memorial bustled with summer tourists, families posing for photographs, tour groups clustered around guides. Michael moved through them like a ghost, present but unseen, his posture adjusted to alter his silhouette, his pace calibrated to avoid attention. Near the base of the massive statue, Colonel William Hargrove waited, dressed in casual civilian attire that belied his 30 years of military intelligence service. "Walk with me," Hargrove said without preamble, falling into step beside Michael. They moved away from the memorial, blending with the crowd flowing toward the reflecting pool. "Your courtroom stunt has created quite the shitstorm, Winters." "It wasn't a stunt, sir," Michael replied evenly. "It was the only option available. Your team showing up uninvited, Harrison bringing classified files into open court. Do you have any idea of the security nightmare you've created?" Hargrove's voice remained conversational despite the tension in his words, a skill developed through decades of sensitive discussions in public spaces. "I was being crucified for doing my duty," Michael said. "Accused of stolen valor while following the Secrecy protocols your office established. They walked in silence for several moments, passing tourists taking selfies with the Washington Monument in the background. Finally, Hargrove sighed. The exposure creates problems, but it also presents an opportunity. We've been tracking the situation. That requires someone with your particular background, someone who's already in the public eye. Michael's stride didn't falter, but his attention sharpened. I'm listening. There's a law firm in Boston, Sullivan and Associates. On paper, they handle corporate litigation and intellectual property. In reality, they're facilitating the transfer of classified defense information to foreign entities. That's FBI territory, not special operations. Hargrove smiled thinly. It would be, except the principal attorney, James Sullivan, served in your unit in 2010 before being medically discharged after the Kandahar operation. His injuries were legitimate, but his current activities suggest his loyalties may have shifted. The information landed like a physical blow. Sullivan had been one of them, a brother who'd bled alongside Michael in operations too classified to acknowledge. The possibility of his betrayal was unthinkable, yet Hargrove wouldn't have raised it without substantial evidence. What's the play? Michael asked, his voice carefully neutral. Sullivan knows all our active operators. He'd spot a military intelligence insertion immediately. But you're already exposed. Your face has been in every newspaper in the country. You're the disgraced Marine who was vindicated in a dramatic courtroom revelation. You want me to approach him as myself? Hargrove nodded. Sullivan and Associates is expanding their Veterans Advocacy Division. They need consultants with special operations experience to help with complex disability claims. Your recent notoriety makes you the perfect candidate, a Marine with classified experience who might harbor resentment toward the military establishment that let him twist in the wind for 2 years. And if Sullivan is innocent, if your intelligence is wrong, then you've helped fellow veterans navigate the benefit system while drawing a comfortable consulting fee. No harm done. But both men understood the unstated alternative. If Sullivan had indeed betrayed his country, if he was using his knowledge of classified operations to identify and expose intelligence assets, then Michael's assignment wasn't about information gathering. It was about stopping a traitor by any means necessary. The office will make arrangements for your travel and accommodation, Hargrove continued. Your cover is simple because it's mostly true. You're exploring private sector opportunities after your public vindication. The press coverage gives you the perfect introduction. Michael's mind was already analyzing angles, contingencies, approaches. His years of training activated automatically, converting a conversation into an operational framework. Timeline? Sullivan's firm is hosting a veterans charity gala in 3 days. Your invitation will arrive tomorrow. First contact in a public setting, surrounded by potential witnesses and cameras. Low risk for initial assessment. They had reached the end of the reflecting pool. Hargrove stopped, turning to face the Capitol dome in the distance. For what it's worth, I argued against the department's handling of your case. Letting you face those accusations alone violated the principles your unit stood for. We all make sacrifices for operational security, Michael replied, the well-rehearsed response masking more complex emotions. Some sacrifices are necessary. Others represent institutional failure. Hargrove extended his hand. The country owes you better, Winters. The handshake concealed the transfer of a small data drive old-school tradecraft in an age of digital surveillance. Michael pocketed it smoothly, the motion invisible to casual observers. I'll be in touch through established channels, Hargrove said, then walked away, quickly lost among tourists streaming toward the museums. Michael remained by the reflecting pool, watching the rippling water mirror clouds passing overhead. The mission parameters were clear, but the emotional landscape was treacherous. Sullivan had been more than a teammate, he'd been a friend, a confidant during the darkest operations, a brother who had once saved Michael's life at great personal cost. The idea of investigating him as a potential traitor felt like a betrayal of the bond forged in combat. But if Sullivan had turned, if he was exposing operations and endangering personnel, then the betrayal was his. And Michael had sworn an oath that transcended personal loyalty. Back in his apartment, Michael inserted the data drive into a secure tablet provided by Hargrove's office. The device was air-gapped, never connected to any network, incapable of wireless communication, designed specifically for reviewing classified material outside secure facilities. The files painted a disturbing picture: financial transactions linking Sullivan's firm to shell companies associated with foreign intelligence services, travel records showing meetings with known handlers, surveillance photos capturing exchanges in locations selected for privacy. Most damning was a timeline correlating compromised operations with Sullivan's access to classified information. 3 deep cover agents exposed. 2 intelligence gathering operations compromised. 1 extraction team ambushed at a supposedly secure location. Each incident preceded by Sullivan accessing related files through his security consulting work with defense contractors. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. James Sullivan, decorated Marine, wounded warrior, trusted brother in arms, appeared to be systematically betraying the country and unit he had once served with distinction. Michael stared at the final surveillance photo, showing Sullivan in a restaurant with a man identified as a foreign intelligence operative. Sullivan's expression was animated, engaged, nothing like the haunted, pain-filled face Michael remembered from hospital visits after Kandahar. The medical discharge had been legitimate. Shrapnel had shredded Sullivan's right leg, ending his field operations career. But something had changed in the years since. The tablet contained a second folder labeled Background Boston Operation. Inside was a comprehensive cover package: consulting contract with Sullivan and Associates, apartment lease in Cambridge, Massachusetts, background materials on the firm's legitimate veterans advocacy work, and profiles of key personnel. The operation had been in development before Michael's courtroom drama. His public exposure had simply made him the perfect insertion vehicle. Michael methodically reviewed each document, memorizing details while searching for inconsistencies or vulnerabilities in the operational framework. The mission was straightforward in concept, but complex in execution: infiltrate Sullivan's organization, confirm his involvement in espionage, identify his network and methodology, then provide intelligence for interdiction by appropriate agencies. What remained unspoken was the contingency plan if Sullivan posed an immediate threat or if the operation was compromised. Michael had operated in the shadows long enough to understand that some solutions couldn't be documented in official briefing. Materials. The charity gala invitation arrived as promised the next morning: an elegant card requesting Michael's presence at the Sullivan and Associates Annual Veterans Service Award dinner at the Boston Harbor Hotel, an accompanying note on law firm. Letterhead expressed interest in discussing potential consulting opportunities, leveraging your unique experience. The signature at the bottom belonged to James Sullivan himself. Michael spent the next 2 days preparing, balancing operational security with the public profile his cover required. He gave a carefully crafted interview to a veterans publication, discussing his vindication without revealing classified details, expressing measured frustration with the system that had questioned his service. The article would reach Sullivan's desk, establishing Michael as someone potentially receptive to recruitment, a former operator who had reasons to resent the military establishment. He traveled to Boston via train rather than flying, reducing his exposure to security cameras and identification checkpoints. The apartment arranged by Hargrove's office was sparsely furnished but strategically located, providing multiple ingress and egress routes while maintaining proximity to Sullivan's firm. On the evening of the gala, Michael dressed in a tailored suit that concealed both a slim recording device and a specially designed non-metallic knife that would pass through security screenings. The weapon was a contingency he hoped to avoid using, but 15 years of special operations had taught him that hope was not a strategy. The Boston Harbor Hotel ballroom glittered with chandeliers and success. Corporate attorneys mingled with military officers in dress uniforms. Wealthy donors circulated among decorated veterans. Champagne flowed freely as a jazz quartet provided sophisticated background music. At the center of it all stood James Sullivan, leaning slightly on an elegant cane, his million-dollar smile and bespoke suit projecting prosperity and confidence. Michael paused at the entrance, studying the man who had once been his brother and might now be his target. Sullivan had aged well, his dark hair now silver at the temples, his face lined but distinguished, his physical presence commanding despite the injury that had ended his military career. Nothing in his demeanor suggested a man betraying his country. He looked like exactly what his public persona claimed, a successful attorney who advocated for veterans while building a prestigious corporate practice. Their eyes met across the crowded room. Sullivan's expression shifted through surprise into genuine warmth as he excused himself from a conversation with a general and made his way toward Michael. "Mike Winters," Sullivan said, extending his hand, "the man of the hour. I wondered if you'd accept my invitation." Michael shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip, the perfectly maintained eye contact, the practiced charm that had always been Sullivan's hallmark, even in combat zones. Hard to resist an invitation from an old teammate, especially one who's done so well for himself. "Let's find somewhere quieter to talk," Sullivan suggested, guiding Michael toward a small balcony overlooking the harbor. "These events are more about fundraising than actual conversation." The balcony offered privacy without isolation visible to the ballroom through glass doors, but removed from the noise and crowding. Sullivan positioned himself with his back to the wall, a habit from operational days that he apparently hadn't abandoned in civilian life. "That was quite a show you put on in court," Sullivan began, his tone conversational but his eyes sharply assessing. Harrison bringing in classified files, the team showing up in uniform. Not exactly standard protocol for maintaining operational security. "Standard protocol had me labeled as a fraud for 2 years, Michael replied, allowing a hint of bitterness to color his words. "Sometimes the rulebook needs to be rewritten." Sullivan nodded slowly. "I followed your case from the beginning. Wanted to reach out, but my position here is complicated. The firm represents defense contractors who wouldn't appreciate learning about my background with your unit." "Seems you've built quite an operation here," Michael observed, gesturing toward the gathering inside. "Long way from Kandahar." A shadow crossed Sullivan's face at the mention of the mission where he'd been wounded. "Getting shot has a way of clarifying priorities. I realized I could do more good navigating systems than operating within them." He studied Michael carefully. "Which brings me to why I invited you. We're expanding our Veterans Advocacy Division. Need consultants who understand classified operations and the challenges they create for benefits claims." "Consulting on veterans' benefits? Seems straightforward enough." Sullivan smiled, the expression not quite reaching his eyes. "Nothing straightforward about it when dealing with operators from classified units. Official records don't match actual service. Medical issues stemming from unauthorized equipment or experimental training protocols. Psychological impacts of operations that officially never happened." He lowered his voice. "Our clients include people like us, Mike. People the system is designed to forget." The pitch was perfect, appealing to brotherhood, to the shared experience of operating outside normal military frameworks, to the frustration of navigating bureaucracies designed to process conventional service. If Sullivan was recruiting Michael for something beyond legitimate consulting, this was the natural first step, establishing common ground and shared grievances. "Sounds worthwhile," Michael acknowledged. though I imagine it requires navigating some significant security restrictions. We have clearances and relationships that facilitate the work, Sullivan replied smoothly. The firm's defense contracting division gives us access to classified systems when necessary, properly compartmentalized, of course. Each statement aligned perfectly with the intelligence in Michael's briefing materials. Sullivan's firm did indeed have clearances through their defense work, creating legitimate access that could mask illegitimate activities. The operation was unfolding exactly as Hargrove had predicted, Sullivan making the expected overtures, establishing the framework for deeper recruitment. I'd be interested in hearing more details, Michael said, projecting the right balance of interest and professional caution. Sullivan's smile broadened. Perfect. We're hosting a more private gathering tomorrow, just the partners and potential consultants. My home in Cambridge, 7 p.m. More relaxed environment for detailed discussions. He produced a business card with an address handwritten on the back. I think you'll find our compensation package extremely competitive, especially for someone with your particular background. Before Michael could respond, they were interrupted by a striking woman in her early 40s, her dark hair swept up elegantly, her simple black dress suggesting tasteful wealth. James, Senator Mitchell is asking for you, she said, her voice carrying a hint of Boston Brahmin refinement. Her eyes assessed Michael with intelligent curiosity. Elena, meet Michael Winters, an old colleague from my previous career. Mike, this is Elena Chambers, our head of international corporate law, and my fiancée. Elena extended her hand with practiced grace. Mr. Winters, James mentioned you might join us tonight. Your recent legal victory made quite the impression. In certain circles. Something in her phrasing triggered Michael's operational instincts. Certain circles suggested specific awareness beyond public news coverage. Her eyes held the calculating assessment of someone with her own agenda, not merely a corporate attorney meeting her fiancé's former colleague. The firm has been following cases like yours with professional interest, she continued. The intersection of classified service and public accountability raises fascinating legal questions. Sullivan placed his hand gently on her arm. Elena specializes in international corporate structures. Very useful for our defense contracting clients with global operations. The introduction was smooth, but Michael noted this subtle course correction, steering the conversation away from classified matters toward legitimate business operations. If Sullivan was involved in transferring sensitive information to foreign entities, Elena Chambers, with her international corporate expertise, would be ideally positioned to facilitate such transfers under the guise of legitimate business transactions. We should both circulate, Sullivan said, checking his watch. Donors expect face time with the hosts. But tomorrow, Mike, Cambridge, 7 p.m. We'll talk properly then. As they rejoined the gala, Michael observed Sullivan working the room with practiced charm, moving effortlessly between military officers, corporate executives, and political figures. Nothing in his demeanor suggested a man engaged in espionage. He projected the image of a successful attorney who had translated his military service into a prosperous civilian career, advocating for fellow veterans. Yet the intelligence was compelling. The pattern of compromised operations too consistent to dismiss. Something had transformed James Sullivan from a Marine who had risked his life for his country into a man who betrayed its secrets. Michael's mission was to confirm that transformation and understand its extent before more lives were lost. As he left the gala, Michael felt the weight of the recording device against his chest, capturing conversations that would be analyzed by intelligence officers searching for code words and hidden meanings. Tomorrow's meeting at Sullivan's home would advance the operation into more dangerous territory, a private setting with fewer witnesses, greater scrutiny, higher stakes. He walked along the harbor, watching lights reflect on dark water, thinking about the nature of loyalty and betrayal. Sullivan had once pulled him from a burning vehicle in Kandahar, suffering the wounds that ended his military career, to save a teammate. How did a man go from such sacrifice to selling secrets that endangered the lives of fellow operators? What had happened in the years between that burning vehicle and this glittering gala to transform brotherhood into betrayal? The answers waited. In Cambridge, in a private meeting where Michael would begin to understand whether his former brother was now truly his enemy. The mission was clear, but the path forward was shadowed by shared history and the bond of men who had once trusted each other with their lives. The Cambridge townhouse stood apart from its neighbors, not in ostentation, but in security. Michael noted the subtleties as he approached. Cameras disguised as decorative fixtures, windows with specialized glazing that prevented thermal imaging, landscaping designed to eliminate blind approaches. Sullivan had built a fortress masquerading as an elegant home, applying operational security principles to domestic architecture. Michael arrived precisely at 7 p.m., carrying a bottle of Macallan 18 Sullivan's preferred scotch during rare moments of downtime between operations. The gift was both a gesture of remembered brotherhood and a calculated touch to reinforce their shared history. The surveillance equipment concealed beneath his clothing had been upgraded from the previous evening, capable of capturing conversations even in electronically shielded environments. The door opened before he could knock. Elena Chambers greeted him with the same polished smile she'd worn at the gala, though her attire was now casual elegance rather than formal wear. "Mr. Winters, right on time, a military habit that's hard to break, I imagine." "Some training stays with you, Michael." Agreed, offering the scotch as he stepped inside. The townhouse interior revealed Sullivan's prosperity without flaunting its tasteful art. Custom furnishings, cutting-edge technology integrated seamlessly into traditional architecture. Elena led him through to a back study where Jane Sullivan waited, standing beside a desk that probably cost more than Michael's entire apartment. "Mike," Sullivan greeted him warmly, embracing him with the familiarity of old comrades. "Good to see you in a setting where we can actually talk." He gestured toward the scotch. "And you remembered. Some things don't change. Unlike most." "Everything else," Michael observed, taking in the study's details, the wall of legal texts, the framed diplomas and bar admissions, the subtle indicators of Sullivan's transformation from operator to attorney. "Life evolves," Sullivan agreed, retrieving crystal tumblers from a cabinet, sometimes by choice, sometimes by necessity. He poured 3 measures of scotch, handing glasses to Michael and Elena before raising his own. To adaptability, the true measure of survival. The toast held multiple meanings in the context of their shared past. Adaptability had kept them alive in combat zones where situations changed without warning. Now it carried different implications as Michael adapted to his role as investigator, while Sullivan potentially adapted classified information for unauthorized disclosure. Elena excused herself after the toast, citing dinner preparations in progress, leaving the 2 former teammates alone in the study. Sullivan settled into a leather armchair, gesturing for Michael to take its twin across a small table inlaid with a chessboard. "I've followed your case from the beginning," Sullivan said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Wanted to reach out, but operational security concerns made that complicated." "Seems a lot of people wanted to help but couldn't," Michael replied, allowing a hint of bitterness to color his tone. "Colonel Davis spent 2 years building a case against me while my supposed brothers in arms kept their distance." Sullivan nodded slowly. The unit lives by its protocols. Secrecy protects the mission, even when individuals pay the price. He studied Michael carefully. "That's why I was surprised by the courtroom theatrics. Harrison bringing classified files into open court. The team showing up in uniform, not exactly by the book. The book was being used to bury me. Sometimes you have to improvise." "Improvisation was always your specialty," Sullivan acknowledged, with a smile that briefly recalled their operational days. Kandahar proved that. The reference hung between them, a mission gone catastrophically wrong. An improvised extraction under heavy fire. Sullivan dragging Michael from a burning vehicle. At the cost of his own career. The shared experience created a gravity that pulled at their conversation, threatening to distract from Michael's current mission. Ancient history, Michael said, redirecting to the present. Your operation here seems impressive. Law firm, veterans. Advocacy, charity work, you've built something substantial. I applied the same principles that made our unit effective, Sullivan explained. Identify objectives, develop specialized capabilities, operate through multiple approaches simultaneously. He leaned forward. Which brings me to why you're here. Our Veterans Advocacy Division needs someone with your background, someone who understands classified operations and their implications for benefits claims. Consulting work sounds straightforward enough, but I imagine there are complications with classified material. Sullivan's eyes narrowed slightly. That's where our firm offers unique advantages. Our Defense Contracting Division provides cover for accessing certain classified systems. We navigate the bureaucracy from the inside. Each statement aligned with the intelligence in Michael's briefing. Sullivan's firm did indeed have legitimate access to sensitive information through defense contracts. The question was whether that access was being exploited for unauthorized purposes. Sounds like you found a way to work the system, Michael observed. The system is designed to forget people like us, Mike. Our official records don't match our actual service. Medical issues from unauthorized equipment or experimental protocols go unacknowledged. Psychological impacts of operations that officially never happened receive no treatment. Sullivan's expression hardened. I'm not working the system, I'm correcting its failures. The passion seemed genuine, and Michael recognized the truth in Sullivan's assessment. Their unit's operations often existed outside conventional military frameworks, creating genuine challenges for veterans seeking benefits. Sullivan's advocacy work could be entirely legitimate while still providing cover for intelligence transfers. What exactly would my role involve? Michael asked, maintaining the cover of a potential recruit while probing for operational details. Sullivan retrieved a folder from his desk, sliding it across the chessboard. We have clients from units similar to ours, operators whose service records are incomplete or deliberately obscured. They need advocates who understand their situation without requiring compromising explanations. Michael reviewed the material's case summaries with identifying details redacted, benefits appeals, medical documentation for injuries sustained during classified operations. The work appeared legitimate, addressing genuine needs of special operations veterans, navigating bureaucratic systems not designed for unconventional service. These are just the straightforward cases, Sullivan continued. The real challenges involve operators exposed to experimental compounds, unauthorized equipment testing, or psychological conditioning protocols that remain classified. Their medical issues can't be addressed without acknowledging programs that officially don't exist. Michael recognized the problem. He'd known operators who suffered effects from classified training or deployment protocols but couldn't obtain proper treatment without revealing classified information. Sullivan's firm appeared to be creating pathways to benefits without compromising operational security, valuable work if legitimate. And you navigate these cases without security breaches? We've developed methodologies, Sullivan replied. Carefully. Ways of documenting service that satisfy VA requirements without exposing operational details. Our defense contracting connections provide useful cover for certain inquiries. The conversation continued through dinner, with Elena rejoining them for a meal that balanced sophistication with comfortable informality. Throughout the evening, Sullivan outlined the consulting opportunity in terms that seemed legitimate while occasionally dropping phrases that could carry dual meanings. References to international partnerships, information sharing protocols, And navigating classification boundaries could be innocent in the context of legal work or could signal something more sinister. After dinner, Sullivan suggested a walk through the private garden behind the townhouse, a space enclosed by high walls and protected from surveillance. As they strolled between carefully tended plantings, the conversation shifted. The legal work is important, Sullivan said, his voice lower despite the garden's privacy. But for someone with your particular background, there are additional opportunities. Michael maintained his cover while his internal alertness heightened. What kind of opportunities? Our defense contracting clients sometimes need consultants. For sensitive projects, threat assessments, security protocols, specialized training. The compensation is substantial, but the work requires discretion beyond what's covered in standard NDAs. Sounds like familiar territory, Michael observed neutrally. Sullivan stopped beside a small fountain, its gentle splashing providing additional audio cover. Some of our international clients have particular interest in consultants with experience in denied areas, places where American forces officially never operated. The statement crossed the line from ambiguous to actively suspicious. Legitimate defense contractors wouldn't seek consultants specifically for experience in unauthorized operational zones. Sullivan was probing Michael's willingness to discuss classified deployments with foreign entities, the first concrete indication of potential recruitment for espionage. International clients can be complicated, Michael replied carefully. Different priorities, different rules of engagement. Exactly. Sullivan studied him intently. Sometimes the most valuable service we provide isn't legal representation, but facilitating understanding between entities with complementary interests. The phrasing was textbook recruitment language suggesting shared interests between Michael and foreign organizations without explicitly proposing illegal activities. Sullivan was testing the waters, assessing whether Michael might be receptive to more direct approaches. I've always believed in understanding all sides of a situation, Michael responded, maintaining the appearance of interest while avoiding commitment. Sullivan nodded, seemingly satisfied with the exchange. We should head back inside. Elena's arranged a small gathering, just a few key partners and consultants you should meet. The study had transformed during their garden walk, now occupied by 3 individuals whose bearing and alertness marked them as something beyond corporate attorneys. Sullivan made introductions with practiced ease. Martin Reeves, head of international security consulting. Diana Chiang, technology transfer specialist. Robert Keller, compliance director for classified contracts. Each title could be legitimate within a defense-oriented law firm, while potentially covering more problematic activities. The conversation flowed naturally, but with purpose, each question probing Michael's background, opinions on military policy, views on international information sharing, and attitude toward classification restrictions. The evaluation was sophisticated, never crossing into explicitly illegal territory, while assessing his potential value and vulnerability. Around midnight, as the gathering concluded, Sullivan walked Michael to the door, their conversation now wrapped in the familiarity of old comrades. The team would like you to consider joining us, Sullivan said. We have a contract ready when you are. The consulting work is legitimate, and valuable veterans who deserve advocacy will benefit from your expertise. And the additional opportunities? Michael asked, maintaining his cover of interested potential recruit. Those develop organically as trust is established. Sullivan's expression turned reflective. You know, after Kandahar, during rehabilitation, I had a lot of time to reconsider what we were doing and why. The operations, the secrecy, the sacrifices. I started asking who really benefited from our blood and pain. The statement echoed recruitment patterns documented in counterintelligence cases, the ideological shift, the questioning of previously accepted premises, the suggestion of exploitation by shadowy authorities. Sullivan was revealing his own justification while testing whether Michael shared similar disillusionment. 15 years gives anyone time to reconsider their choices. Michael acknowledged, neither agreeing nor dismissing Sullivan's perspective. Exactly. Sullivan placed a hand on Michael's shoulder, the gesture reminiscent of their time as teammates. Think about the contract. If it feels right, we can discuss broader horizons. The phrasing confirmed Hargrove's intelligence assessment. Sullivan was involved in activities beyond legitimate legal work, activities he was now inviting Michael to join. The evidence wasn't yet conclusive regarding classified information transfer, but the recruitment approach followed established patterns for developing intelligence assets. Michael returned to his temporary apartment, his mind processing them. Evening's interactions while his hands conducted a thorough sweep for surveillance devices. Finding none, he activated a secure communication terminal disguised as a standard laptop and transmitted a coded update to Hargrove's team. The response came within minutes: instructions to accept Sullivan's consulting contract and begin integration into the firm's operations. The mission was advancing from assessment to infiltration, with Michael now tasked with identifying specific classified information being compromised and the foreign entities receiving it. The next morning brought a formal offer letter delivered by courier, a consulting contract with Sullivan and Associates, offering substantial compensation for veterans, advocacy work with the possibility of additional projects as needed. Michael signed the agreement, officially beginning his infiltration of the firm that his former brother had potentially transformed into a vehicle for espionage. The following weeks established Michael's presence within Sullivan's operation. He maintained a careful balance, demonstrating value through legitimate consulting work while gradually earning access to more sensitive areas of the firm's activities. Each case he handled involved genuine advocacy for veterans with classified service backgrounds, addressing legitimate needs while providing cover for his true mission. Sullivan's approach proved more sophisticated than anticipated. Rather than immediate exposure to compromising activities, Michael was subjected to what counterintelligence professionals called progressive compromise, gradual involvement in increasingly problematic actions designed to build complicity. Before revealing the full scope of illegal operations, it began with seemingly innocent requests, reviewing classified service records to support benefits claims, providing expertise on equipment used in denied areas, consulting on security protocols for defense contractors. Each task remained technically within legal boundaries, while pushing against ethical lines and establishing patterns that could later facilitate more significant breaches. Throughout this process, Michael maintained his cover while gathering evidence on Sullivan's network and methodology. Elena Chambers emerged as a central figure, her international corporate law expertise providing the framework for information transfers disguised as legitimate business transactions. The partners Michael had met at Sullivan's home operated as a coordinated team, each managing different aspects of what increasingly appeared to be a sophisticated espionage operation. 4 weeks into the infiltration, Sullivan invited Michael to accompany him to a client meeting at a private club in Boston's financial district. The setting offered both exclusivity and privacy, membership limited to corporate executives and high-level professionals, communication devices prohibited, conversations protected by architectural design and operational protocols. "We're meeting representatives from Meridian Global Solutions," Sullivan explained as they settled into a private dining room. Officially, they're a Singapore-based technology development firm interested in compliance consulting for American defense contracts. Unofficially, they have connections to entities interested in specific aspects of American military capabilities. The statement crossed from implication into explicit recruitment for espionage. Sullivan was no longer testing waters but actively involving Michael in meetings with foreign entities seeking classified information. "Sounds like sensitive territory," Michael observed. maintaining his cover while activating specialized recording equipment concealed in his watch technology, designed to function despite the club's electronic countermeasures. "It's relationship building," Sullivan replied smoothly. "Information flows in multiple directions. They gain insights into American systems. Our clients gain access to international markets. Everyone benefits from improved understanding." The justification was textbook rationalization for espionage recasting, unauthorized information transfer as mutually beneficial exchange rather than betrayal of national security. Sullivan had constructed a moral framework that allowed him to view his actions as legitimate business rather than treason. The meeting itself revealed the sophistication of Sullivan's operation. The Meridian representatives, 3 Asian men, with impeccable credentials and perfect English, discussed defense, contracting opportunities in terms that appeared legitimate while embedding specific requests for classified information within seemingly innocuous business inquiries. Sullivan facilitated the conversation masterfully, never explicitly offering classified information, while clearly communicating his access and willingness to share under appropriate circumstances. The dance was performed with precision born of practice, everyone understanding the true purpose while maintaining plausible deniability. Throughout the exchange, Michael observed Sullivan not as the traitor described in intelligence briefings, but as the same strategic thinker he'd known in combat operations, analytical, meticulous, focused on objectives. The difference wasn't in capability but in application. The skills that had once protected American interests now deployed to compromise them. As they left the meeting, Sullivan seemed satisfied. "They were impressed with your background. Your courtroom vindication actually adds credibility, someone who stood up to the system, and one commands respect in certain circles." "Interesting group," Michael replied neutrally. "Their technical questions showed sophisticated understanding of American systems." "They're well informed," Sullivan agreed, "which makes the relationship valuable. They provide insights we wouldn't otherwise access. We facilitate their understanding of American procedures. Everyone benefits." The drive back to Cambridge offered opportunity for deeper conversation, Sullivan seemingly comfortable enough to speak more openly in the privacy of his specially modified vehicle. "The work we're doing goes beyond standard consulting," he said, navigating Boston traffic with practiced ease. "The veterans' advocacy is genuine. We've helped hundreds of operators receive benefits they deserved. But the international relationships serve broader purposes." "What kind of purposes?" Michael asked, encouraging Sullivan to elaborate while the recording device captured every word. Sullivan glanced at him briefly before returning his attention to the road. "The classification system doesn't just protect operational security, Mike. It protects institutional failures, policy disasters, and corporate profiteering. I spent years watching defense contractors make billions selling equipment that failed in the field while operators died using it." The statement contained enough truth to be compelling. Michael had witnessed the same failures, had seen operations compromised by inadequate equipment while contractors collected payment regardless of performance. Sullivan was building his justification on legitimate grievances shared by many operators. "After Kandahar, during rehabilitation, I had time to see the bigger picture," Sullivan continued. "The same corporations that profit from classified contracts use secrecy to hide failures, then lobby against benefits for the operators injured by their products. The system is designed to protect profits, not people." "So you're international. Clients help expose these failures?" Michael asked, probing the rationalization further. "They provide counterbalance," Sullivan replied carefully. "When certain entities understand American capabilities accurately rather than through propaganda, it actually reduces conflict potential. Transparency prevents miscalculation." The justification shifted from corporate accountability to geopolitical stability, another common rationalization for espionage. Sullivan had constructed a comprehensive moral framework that transformed betrayal into principled action, recasting himself not as traitor, but as necessary corrective to systemic corruption. "The real question," Sullivan said as they approached his townhouse, "is whether you're ready to move beyond conventional constraints. The consulting work matters, but the international relationships offer opportunity to address deeper problems." The invitation was explicit. Now Sullivan was recruiting Michael for direct involvement in espionage activities, having progressively tested his receptiveness and established sufficient trust to risk exposure. "I've never been particularly conventional," Michael replied, maintaining his cover while gathering the final evidence needed to confirm Sullivan's activities and methodology. Sullivan smiled, the expression reminiscent of shared moments during operations when plans came together successfully. "Good. We have a more substantive meeting next week, technical specialists rather than business representatives. Your expertise will be particularly valuable." The exchange confirmed the final elements needed for prosecution-specific intent to transfer classified information to foreign entities, established methodology for facilitating such transfers, and ongoing operations that could be intercepted. Michael had confirmed his former brother's betrayal beyond any reasonable doubt. As they parted that evening, Sullivan embraced him with the warmth of old comrades. "It's good having you on the team again, Mike. Some partnerships transcend conventional boundaries." Michael returned the embrace, feeling the weight of brotherhood and betrayal simultaneously. "Some things don't change," he agreed, the statement carrying different meanings for each man. Walking back to his temporary apartment, Michael activated emergency communication protocols, transmitting the recorded evidence to Hargrove's team with a simple coded message: "Confirmation complete. Interception required." The response came within minutes. Operational authorization for the mission's final phase. In 48 hours, federal agents would move against Sullivan's organization, arresting key figures and seizing evidence of espionage activities. Michael's role would transition from infiltration to testimony, his evidence central to prosecuting the man who had once saved his life. The weight of this reality settled on him as he secured his apartment for the night. The brotherhood formed in combat had been real. Sullivan's sacrifice in Kandahar had been genuine. He had risked his life to save Michael without hesitation. Yet something had transformed that same man into someone who betrayed the principles they had once defended together. The coming days would require Michael to complete that transformation from brother to adversary, from teammate to accuser. Justice demanded this final mission, but it would carry costs beyond what operational briefings could quantify. The bonds forged in combat didn't dissolve easily, even when betrayal made them untenable. Tomorrow would bring preparations for the interception operation. Tonight brought only reflection on how men who had once trusted each other with their lives could end up on opposite sides of loyalty's boundary. The mission parameters were clear, but the emotional terrain remained complex beyond any operational mapping. Dawn broke over Boston Harbor as Michael completed his final preparations. The federal agents would move at precisely 10 a.m., synchronized. Raids targeting Sullivan's townhouse, law office, and several associated properties. Michael's role was carefully choreographed. He would arrive at Sullivan's office for a scheduled meeting, maintaining his cover until the last possible moment to ensure key players remained in position. The weight of the coming confrontation settled in his chest as he methodically checked his equipment. The recording devices had served their purpose, capturing damning evidence of Sullivan's recruitment efforts and explicit discussions of transferring classified information to foreign entities. Today's operation would transition from intelligence gathering to law enforcement, with Michael serving as both witness and potential first responder if the situation deteriorated. He dressed with deliberate care, choosing attire that would allow freedom of movement while maintaining his consultant appearance. The shoulder holster contained a specialized sidearm provided by Hargrove's team, designed to pass through Sullivan's security measures. A contingency Michael hoped to avoid using, but couldn't dismiss given the stakes. At 9:15 a.m., he left his temporary apartment for the last time, walking towards Sullivan and Associates with the measured pace of a man attending a routine business meeting rather than the culmination of a counterintelligence operation. Boston's financial district bustled around him, ordinary people heading to ordinary jobs, unaware of the shadow war playing out in their midst. Michael's phone vibrated with a text message from an unmarked number. Assets in position. Countdown. Active. Maintain protocol. Hargrove's confirmation that the operation was proceeding as planned. Federal agents would be taking positions around Sullivan's building, prepared to move on command while maintaining their cover until the last possible moment. The Sullivan and Associates offices occupied 3 floors of a prestigious building with views of the harbor. The reception area projected tasteful Prosperity mahogany furnishings, subtle lighting, discreet displays of legal awards, and charitable recognition. The receptionist greeted Michael with practiced warmth, directing him to Sullivan's private office where Mr. Sullivan is waiting with the international consultants. The phrasing confirmed intelligence that Sullivan was meeting with his foreign contacts this morning. Perfect timing for the interception operation. Michael thanked her and proceeded down the hallway, cataloging details automatically. 2 security personnel disguised as administrative staff. Cameras concealed in architectural features. Electronic locks requiring both keycard and biometric confirmation. Sullivan had constructed a fortress within the legitimate business security. Measures excessive for a conventional law firm, but appropriate for an espionage operation. Sullivan's office door stood open, revealing him in conversation with 3 men whose appearance matched profiles of known foreign intelligence operatives. Elena Chambers sat beside Sullivan, her elegant attire and poised demeanor masking her suspected role as financial facilitator for information transfers. "Mike, right on time," Sullivan called out, rising to greet him with the easy familiarity they'd re-established over recent weeks. "Come meet our international consultants." Michael entered the office, accepting handshakes from men introduced with corporate titles that thinly disguised their actual functions. Each name connected to intelligence briefings, identifying them as foreign agents specifically targeting American defense capabilities. Their presence provided final confirmation of Sullivan's activities. These weren't legitimate business consultants, but handlers for a sophisticated intelligence operation. "We were just discussing specialized training protocols," Sullivan explained smoothly, gesturing toward digital displays showing what appeared to be technical schematics. "Our friends are particularly interested in your experience with certain equipment configurations used in denied areas." The statement was explicit solicitation of classified information, Sullivan asking Michael to share restricted technical details with foreign intelligence agents. The recording devices captured the exchange, adding to the evidence that would support prosecution. "Happy to provide insights," Michael replied, maintaining his cover while noting the time 9:47 a.m., 13 minutes until federal agents would move. Though some configurations might be restricted by classification. Sullivan smiled knowingly. "We've developed methodologies for navigating those restrictions. Elena has prepared the appropriate documentation to cover our discussion under consulting frameworks." Elena opened a laptop, displaying contracts that appeared legitimate while containing carefully worded clauses that could justify classified discussions under the guise of international business consulting. The approach was sophisticated, creating paper trails that could provide plausible deniability while facilitating actual espionage. As the meeting progressed, Sullivan grew increasingly explicit, directing conversation toward specific military capabilities of interest to his foreign contacts. Michael provided carefully calibrated responses, appearing cooperative while avoiding actual disclosure of classified information. Each exchange was captured by recording devices, building an airtight case against everyone in the room. At 9:58 a.m., Michael's phone vibrated again, the final alert that federal agents were moving into position. 2 minutes until the operation commenced. He maintained his focus on Sullivan, watching for any indication that security had detected the approaching team. "The technical specifications you mentioned," one of the foreign operatives said to Sullivan, "they align with our development priorities. Your consultant's insights would be particularly valuable given his operational experience." Sullivan nodded. Mike understands the importance of international cooperation. His recent experiences with military bureaucracy have provided perspective on information sharing beyond conventional restrictions. The statement confirmed Sullivan's belief that Michael was receptive to espionage recruitment, a miscalculation that would prove fatal to his operation. As the clock hit 10 a.m., Michael shifted position slightly, creating line of sight to all individuals in the room while reaching for his phone as if checking messages. The building's security system emitted a subtle tone perimeter breach, alerts signaling that federal agents had begun their entry. Sullivan's expression changed instantly, years of operational training activating as he recognized the sound that ordinary occupants might dismiss. "We have a situation," he said quietly to Elena, who immediately began closing down electronic displays. The foreign operatives tensed, their casual business demeanor evaporating as ingrained security protocols took over. Michael maintained his cover, feigning confusion. "Problem with the building security?" "Possibly," Sullivan replied, moving toward a concealed panel that likely contained security controls and possibly weapons. "Standard precaution. We'll resume shortly." The office door burst open as federal agents in tactical gear entered with practiced precision, weapons raised but disciplined. "Federal agents, everyone on the ground. Hands where we can see them." The foreign operatives complied immediately, their training including protocols for capture situations. Elena froze momentarily before slowly raising her hands. Sullivan, however, had positioned himself near the concealed panel, his hand hovering near what might be an alarm or weapon. "James," Michael said quietly, standing amidst the chaos with deliberate calm. "It's over." Sullivan's eyes locked with his, comprehension dawning as he processed Michael's unnatural composure amid the raid. "You," he said softly, betrayal and recognition mingling in his expression. "How long?" "From the beginning," Michael replied, maintaining eye contact while federal agents secured the other individuals. "Your operation was compromised before I arrived." Sullivan's hand moved toward the panel, but Michael was faster, crossing the distance between them with the speed that had made him effective in combat operations. He restrained Sullivan's arm with practiced efficiency, using leverage rather than force to neutralize the threat without injury. "Don't," he said quietly, close enough that only Sullivan could hear. "There's been enough betrayal already." For a moment, Sullivan resisted, the instincts of an operator pushing against acceptance of defeat. Then something shifted in his expression: resignation, replacing resistance as the reality of his situation settled fully. "I saved your life at Kandahar," he said, his voice carrying no accusation, merely statement of fact. "Yes," Michael acknowledged. "And now I'm trying to save what's left of yours." Federal agents moved forward, taking Sullivan into custody with professional efficiency. As they led him from the office, Sullivan paused, turning back toward Michael, with an expression that carried echoes of their shared past. "Was any of it real?" he asked. "The brotherhood, the bond formed in combat, was that just operational cover too?" The question cut deeper than any physical confrontation. Michael met his former teammate's gaze directly. "The brotherhood was real. What happened in Kandahar was real. What you became afterward, that's what brought us here." Sullivan nodded slowly, accepting the answer if not its implications. As federal agents led him away, Michael remained in the emptying office, surrounded by the remnants of an operation that had required him to turn against a man who had once saved his life. Colonel Hargrove entered once the suspects had been removed, surveying the scene with professional detachment. Clean operation. Sullivan and his primary associates in custody. Evidence secured. Foreign operatives detained for diplomatic processing. Michael nodded, his attention still fixed on the doorway where Sullivan had disappeared. He asked if the Brotherhood was real. Hargrove studied him carefully. What did you tell him? The truth. That what we shared in combat was genuine, but it doesn't excuse what came after. Complicated answers for complicated situations, Hargrove observed. The intelligence community will spend years analyzing how Sullivan transformed from decorated Marine to foreign asset. The psychological profile alone will influence counterintelligence training for a generation. But Michael wasn't thinking about training protocols or intelligence analysis. His mind returned to the burning vehicle in Kandahar, to Sullivan dragging him from flames despite shrapnel tearing through his own body, to the brotherhood forged in those moments that should have transcended all other considerations. His justifications were complex, Michael said. Corporate corruption, contractor failures, systematic disregard for operators injured by equipment that shouldn't have been deployed. He built a comprehensive moral framework that transformed espionage into righteous action. Most traitors do, Hargrove replied. Few people can live with seeing themselves as villains. They need narratives that cast their actions as necessary, even heroic. Some of his criticisms weren't wrong, Michael noted. Defense contractors do profit from failures. Classification does hide corporate negligence. Veterans do struggle against bureaucracies designed to minimize their sacrifices. Hargrove's expression hardened slightly. The legitimacy of grievances doesn't justify betraying your country, Winters. Sullivan chose to address real problems by committing treason rather than working within the system for change. The assessment was accurate but incomplete. Michael had seen Sullivan's transformation from dedicated Marine to sophisticated operative. For foreign interests, not a sudden moral collapse but a gradual shift. Each step justifiable in isolation until the cumulative journey led to betrayal. Clean up here and get some rest, Hargrove instructed. Debriefing tomorrow at secure location. Alpha, your testimony will be central to prosecution. As Hargrove departed, Michael remained in Sullivan's office, studying the space that had housed both legitimate veterans advocacy and sophisticated espionage. The duality represented Sullivan's entire Operation Genuine Service intertwined with betrayal, principled action merged with treason. The weeks that followed unfolded with the methodical precision of federal prosecution. Evidence gathered during Michael's infiltration proved damning recorded conversations, explicitly discussing classified information transfer, documented meetings with known foreign intelligence operatives, financial transactions tracing payments for specific intelligence products. Sullivan's defense team attempted to characterize the operation as legitimate international consulting, with occasional boundary confusion rather than systematic espionage. The strategy collapsed under the weight of evidence, particularly the recordings capturing explicit discussions of circumventing classification restrictions and transferring sensitive information to foreign entities. Throughout preliminary hearings, Sullivan maintained the dignified composure that had characterized his military service, refusing plea agreements and insisting on his right to trial. His eyes frequently found Michael in the courtroom, carrying questions that transcended legal proceedings, not about evidence or testimony, but about brotherhood and its limits. 3 months after the arrest, as trial preparations intensified, Michael received an unexpected communication request for a meeting from Sullivan, transmitted through proper legal channels with assurances that no discussion of case specifics would occur. The meeting took place in a federal detention facility, monitored but with limited privacy for conversation deemed non-prejudicial to pending legal proceedings. As federal marshals led Sullivan from the courtroom, His eyes met Michael's one final time, conveying complex meaning without words. Acknowledgement of accountability. Recognition of brotherhood that had survived betrayal. Commitment to salvaging something constructive from personal destruction. After the courtroom cleared, Hargrove approached Michael in the corridor outside. The transcripts from Sullivan's testimony have already initiated 3 separate congressional inquiries into defense contracting practices. His insights into systemic failures are proving valuable despite the circumstances of their delivery. Reform through accountability rather than betrayal, Michael observed. The path he should have chosen originally. The path you helped create despite his choices, Hargrove corrected. Most counterintelligence operations end with imprisonment. Few generate constructive institutional response while maintaining appropriate consequences. Michael nodded, acknowledging the assessment while his thoughts remained with the complex journey from brotherhood to betrayal to partial redemption. Sullivan would serve his sentence. Accountability unavoidable for choices that endangered national security and betrayed his oath. But something constructive would emerge from that accountability: reforms, addressing legitimate grievances, systems improved through painful lessons. Future operators potentially spared the progressive compromise that had transformed a decorated Marine into someone capable of betrayal. As Michael left the courthouse, stepping into Washington sunshine that seemed unaware of the shadow operations and complex loyalties that had played out within those walls, he carried both the weight of necessary betrayal and the possibility of constructive outcome. The brotherhood formed in combat had survived its greatest test, not by excusing betrayal, but by channeling its aftermath towards something that honored their shared sacrifice rather than negating it. The invisible warrior had become visible, not just in courtroom vindication, but in transformation of personal tragedy into institutional opportunity, salvaging meaning from circumstances that might otherwise have produced only loss. The final mission had proven the most challenging, requiring navigation of terrain where right and wrong intertwined with brotherhood and betrayal. The path forward remained complex, but it led toward possibility rather than merely punishment, toward reform rather than simply retribution. In that possibility lay the true meaning of the oath. Both men had taken years, earlier service continuing despite circumstances, commitment to principles transcending personal considerations, brotherhood surviving even its greatest challenges. Through truth rather than comfortable fictions. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Sullivan waited in a small conference room, his orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the tailored suits he'd worn as a successful attorney. Despite the circumstances, he carried himself with the same disciplined posture that had characterized his military bearing. "Thank you for coming," he said as Michael took the seat across from him. "I wasn't sure you would." "Some conversations need to happen regardless of circumstances," Michael replied. Sullivan studied him carefully. "Not here to extract a confession or gather additional evidence. This isn't an operational meeting, James. Just 2 former teammates talking." Something in Sullivan's expression shifted, a barrier lowering, allowing glimpses of the man beneath the defendant. "I've had a lot of time to think in here. About choices, justifications, consequences." He glanced around the sterile room. "About how certain I was that my actions were necessary and justifiable." Michael remained silent, allowing Sullivan space to continue without prompting. "The operation was sophisticated," Sullivan acknowledged. "Your cover was perfect. The disgruntled operator vindicated in court, but potentially receptive to recruitment. Hargrove's team constructed it well. It wasn't just operational design," Michael said. "It was knowledge of you, how you think, what you value, which arguments would resonate." Sullivan nodded slowly. "The best operations leverage truth rather than fabricating fiction." You used our actual brotherhood to infiltrate my organization. There was no accusation in his tone, merely professional assessment. Effective methodology. The brotherhood wasn't operational cover, Michael countered. It was real in Kandahar, and it's still real now. Yet here we sit, you gathering evidence against me facing espionage charges that carry potential life sentences. Sullivan's expression remained controlled, but something vulnerable showed beneath the composure. How does brotherhood accommodate that reality? The question cut to the heart of their situation: how loyalty survived betrayal, how bonds forged in combat navigated the terrain of opposing principles. Brotherhood doesn't mean enabling destructive choices, Michael said carefully. Sometimes, the greatest loyalty involves preventing further damage rather than facilitating it. Sullivan absorbed this, his eyes reflecting complex calculations behind his measured expression. My attorneys believe the prosecution's case is substantial. The recordings alone establish intent and action beyond reasonable doubt. I'm not here to discuss legal strategy. No, Sullivan agreed. You're here because whatever I became, whatever choices I made, the brotherhood formed in combat still matters to you. Just as it still matters to me, despite everything that's happened since. The acknowledgement hung between them, recognition that bonds formed in life or death situations transcended ordinary relationships, creating connections that survive even fundamental betrayals. I'm not seeking forgiveness, Sullivan continued. My choices were deliberate, made with full understanding of their implications. But I want you to know that what happened at Kandahar, pulling you from that vehicle, everything we experienced in combat, that was never false, never corrupted by what came later. Michael nodded slowly. I know. That's what makes this situation tragic rather than simply criminal. You're not someone who betrayed his country for money or ideology. You're someone whose genuine grievances and experiences led to progressively problematic choices until you crossed lines that can't be uncrossed. Sullivan's composed facade cracked slightly, revealing glimpses of the internal conflict beneath his controlled exterior. The system fails operators, Mike. Defense contractors profit while service members die using inadequate equipment. Classification hides corporate negligence. Veterans fight bureaucracies designed to minimize their sacrifices. All true, Michael acknowledged. But your response empowered foreign entities that would use that information against the same operators you claimed to protect. Your methods betrayed the very people your principles sought to defend. The assessment landed with visible impact. Sullivan's expression revealed recognition of contradictions he'd rationalized away during years of progressive compromise. There were other paths, Michael continued quietly. Legislative advocacy, whistleblower protections, institutional reform efforts. You chose espionage instead, convincing yourself it was the only effective option. Sullivan remained silent for several moments, processing this perspective with the analytical precision that had once made him an effective operator and later an effective spy. Finally, he nodded slowly. Your testimony will be persuasive, he sighed. The recordings, the documented meetings, your first-hand observations, the prosecution has what it needs for conviction. This isn't about securing a conviction, James. It's about acknowledging reality so something constructive might emerge from this situation. Sullivan studied him with renewed intensity. What constructive outcome could possibly emerge from espionage charges and inevitable imprisonment? The truth about systemic failures that contributed to your choices, Michael replied. The legitimate grievances that you addressed through illegitimate means. The reforms needed to prevent others from following similar paths. Understanding dawned in Sullivan's expression. You want me to transform my prosecution into a platform for the very reforms I claim to pursue. Your credibility is compromised, but your knowledge remains valuable. The failures you identified are real. The problems you sought to address affect thousands of operators and veterans. Your methods were wrong, but your diagnosis wasn't entirely mistaken. The proposition hung between them, an opportunity for Sullivan to salvage something meaningful from his downfall, to channel his knowledge toward legitimate reform rather than continued justification of espionage. The prosecutor would never agree to such an approach, Sullivan observed. Not directly, Michael acknowledged. But your testimony could establish patterns of institutional failure without compromising your legal position. Hargrove's team includes advocates for reform who understand these systemic issues. There are channels for constructive input that don't require public grandstanding. Sullivan considered this, the strategist in him evaluating angles and implications. A legacy beyond betrayal. Some measure of redemption without diminishing. Accountability, precisely. For the first time since his arrest, Sullivan's expression showed something beyond controlled composure or strategic calculation, a glimpse of the man who had once been driven by genuine service rather than complicated rationalizations. The brotherhood we formed in combat was real, Michael said quietly. That same brotherhood now requires honesty about what happened afterward, not to condemn, but to understand and potentially repair. Sullivan nodded slowly. I'll consider it, not for leniency or legal advantage, but because something constructive should emerge from this situation. As their meeting concluded, Sullivan extended his hand across the table, the gesture reminiscent of countless moments shared during operations when words proved inadequate for expressing mutual trust and commitment. Michael accepted the handshake without hesitation. Whatever Sullivan had become, whatever choices had led him to this detention facility facing espionage charges, the foundation of their connection remained intact, forged in combat, tested by betrayal, now potentially channeled toward something constructive, despite everything that had transpired. 6 months later, the trial of United States v. Sullivan concluded with a negotiated resolution that balanced accountability with opportunity. For systemic reform, Sullivan accepted responsibility for specific charges, while providing detailed testimony about institutional failures that had contributed to his progressive compromise. The courtroom had transformed from venue for conventional prosecution into forum for exposing legitimate grievances requiring institutional attention. Sullivan's legal team, coordinating with reform advocates within military and intelligence communities, crafted an approach that acknowledged criminal conduct while illuminating systemic problems requiring structural solutions. Michael watched from the gallery as Sullivan delivered his final statement before sentencing, not excusing his actions, but contextualizing them within frameworks that military and intelligence leaders needed to understand if similar compromises were to be prevented. My choices were wrong, Sullivan stated clearly. No grievance, however legitimate, justifies betraying operational security or endangering fellow service members. I accept responsibility for those choices and their consequences. He paused, his composure perfect despite the gravity of the moment. But understanding how a decorated Marine becomes someone capable of such betrayal requires examining the systems that transform legitimate grievances into destructive responses. My journey from Kandahar to this courtroom wasn't random or inevitable. It followed paths created by institutional failures that remain unaddressed. The judge sentenced Sullivan to 20 years in federal custody, substantial punishment, acknowledging the severity of espionage while incorporating cooperation that facilitated reforms beyond the specific case.